Conservative Democratic Senator Joe Manchin apparently has a huge problem with fixing our broken elections. Now, lately, he's had a problem with all sorts of things that would benefit his own constituents, like a $15 an hour minimum wage, doing away with the Senate filibuster, which serves as a massive obstacle in getting important policies passed. And now we're hearing that he is not in favor of passing the so-called For the People Act. And this would be legislation that would really reform our elections, get money out of politics, and ensure that everyone who's eligible to vote has the ability to do so. So the Senate filibuster reformers, according to Vox, hoped a GOP filibuster of Democrats' big voting rights bill, the For the People Act, could spur holdout senators to change the rules to pass it because it's so important. Manchin, though, recoils at the very idea. He recoils at the very idea of doing what's necessary to reform our elections, which of course have been incredibly problematic. If you're a worker in this country, especially a wage worker, being able to take a little bit of time off to get to the polls and stand in an incredibly long line to vote is an issue. There are all sorts of problems, especially when it comes to election security, right? I mean, Republicans claim that they care deeply about preventing voter fraud. And so why is this an issue? Why is it so difficult to pass the For the People Act, and why is Manchin unwilling to, in the very least, reform the filibuster to open the path for this important legislation to pass? Well, this is what he says. How in the world could you, with the tension we have right now, allow a voting bill to restructure the voting of America on a partisan line? Why is this gonna be a partisan issue, though? I mean, when you really think about it, all Manchin and corporate Democrats would need to do, or Democrats overall, anyone in favor of this kind of legislation would need to do, is make the case that for months after the general election, you had one GOP lawmaker after the next, one Trump lawyer after the next, one Trump campaign official after the next, crying, whining, and complaining about how our election system isn't safe enough. It's not secure enough. We need election security. Well, this legislation addresses that. Why not call them out on their own hypocrisy? But what Manchin is supposedly worried about is that if this type of legislation passes by reforming the filibuster, well, we should be terrified of another January 6th happening. We should be worried about Republican voters storming the Capitol again. We should be scared of people breaking the law and doing terrible things. That's what Manchin is saying here. Do I believe him? No. But this is the dog crap argument that he's giving us right now. He says that 20 to 25% of the public already doesn't trust the system, and that a party line overhaul would guarantee that number would increase, leading to more anarchy like that at the Capitol on January 6th. I just believe with all my heart, he says, all my heart and soul, that's what would happen, and I'm not gonna be part of it. Now, in reality, Manchin is presenting himself as this reasonable Democrat, someone who's trying to protect the country, someone who wants to ensure that lawmakers work together in unity, in solidarity to carry out the best interests of Americans. When in reality, this is about his donors. When in reality, this is about him knowing that once you get rid of those obstacles, like the legislative filibuster in the Senate, then you might actually pass a $15 an hour minimum wage. You might actually pass Biden's infrastructure bill. You might actually pass the American Families Plan. And his donors, they don't like that. They don't like that. That's what this is about. And in the meantime, he'd rather present himself as a little punk who's afraid of Trump supporters, rather than take ownership of the fact that he has been bought and he has no interest in protecting this country's democracy and ensuring that every American who's eligible to vote has the ability to vote without obstacles in the way. So let's also keep in mind that Manchin will go out of his way to insult his own constituents and insult the American people in an effort to strip down some of Biden's proposals. And he did that recently when it came to his infrastructure plan. As we've reported earlier, Biden's infrastructure plan calls for more than $2 trillion in spending. Manchin is going along with the GOP talking point about how no, it should be like around $600 to $800 billion, and it should just focus on roads and bridges. And when he was asked why he believes that, get a load of how he insulted voters.
There seems to be a bit of a disconnect on how to define infrastructure here. President Biden has broader ambitions. He, for example, has a plan inside his big proposal that includes $400 billion for in-home care for elderly Americans and those with disabilities, also billions more for childcare facilities. Do you support that?
Well, here's the thing. All the things that he has stated that's needed is needed. I do think they should be separated because when you start putting so much into one bill, which we call an omnibus bill, makes it very, very difficult for the public to understand.
I think American voters are stupid. They don't understand how beneficial childcare and elder care could be, so let's take it out of the bill. I mean, I'm paid to say that. I mean, he's such a clown. I can't stand lawmakers insulting our intelligence. I can't stand it. As they stand there and serve as prostitutes for corporate interests, they turn around and insult our intelligence like this, and I can't stand it. In fact, why don't we look at polling in regard to the For the People Act, which again would reform our elections, take money out of politics. Looks like the majority of voters, according to Data for Progress, are in favor of it. Overall support, 62%. Overall opposition, only 23%. So the net support among likely voters is a whopping 39%. Why don't we take a look at how this breaks down among party lines? Likely Democratic voters definitely support reforming our elections. 79% are in favor of HR 1. Likely independent voters also like this, 61% are in favor. And even among the GOP, 43% of likely Republican voters favor this legislation. And I think it's important to really remind you all of what this legislation includes, because it is comprehensive and there are provisions in here that we desperately need. For instance, same-day voter registration for federal elections. Pretty important considering what we're seeing in some of these now purple states like Georgia, Texas, the states that didn't like the fact that they're seeing more and more Democratic voters. Georgia certainly didn't like that it flipped from Trump to Biden in the last general election, so they passed all sorts of restrictive voting laws. So HR 1 could undo that, but Manchin's not really interested in it. Requires states to hold early voting for at least 2 weeks, and it would establish automatic voter registration. It would make election day, this is important, a national holiday so people can vote. It would also require states to provide online voter registration, which by the way has already been adopted in 39 states. It would establish criminal penalties for people who corruptly hinder, interfere with, or prevent another person from registering to vote, and for voter deception and intimidation. I know Republicans like to engage in that. There were a lot of threats about that during the last general election, but it would be nice if people can feel safe and free to go cast their ballot with no fear of intimidation. And HR 1 would do that. The bill, by the way, also requires election officials to notify any voter tagged for removal from the rolls. So I can understand why the GOP doesn't like that, because they love to purge their rolls and make it difficult for people who would typically vote for Democrats to vote. It also offers additional protections for those with disabilities, making it easier for them to vote. And as I mentioned, there is a big part of this that includes election security, something that the GOP claims to care about, something that everyone in the country should care about. It mandates paper ballots. And Republican voters would love this. All voting machines used in federal elections must be manufactured in the United States. They claim they like this stuff, so why would the GOP be against it? Why isn't Manchin asking those questions? That's right, he's paid not to. He's paid not to ask those questions. And when it comes to getting money out of politics, the bill would introduce voluntary public financing for campaigns, matching small donations at a 6-to-1 ratio. The money would come from a new Freedom from Influence fund under the US Treasury, which would collect funds by charging a small fee assessed on criminal and civil fines and penalties or settlements with banks and corporations that commit corporate malfeasance. So there's really no reason to be against this. There's no reason for Senator Manchin to go along with the GOP when the GOP is really full of it on this issue. They claim to want election security, but once they have an opportunity to vote in favor of it, they run away. Because to them, election security is nothing more than a political tool that they will use at their convenience. That's all it is for them. They don't actually care about it. They'll just pretend to care about it when an election doesn't go their way. And Joe Manchin is pathetic enough to go along with their nonsense because he's afraid to stick up to his donors, because he's afraid to do the right thing by the American people. And then you'll hear others say like, no, but he comes from a conservative state. West Virginia is a conservative state. No. West Virginians wanted a $15 an hour minimum wage. Joe Manchin told them to shut up, essentially. And Joe Manchin keeps talking about passing legislation in a bipartisan way. After he stripped down the coronavirus relief package, when he took the weekly unemployment benefits from $400 a week to $300 a week, when he succeeded in implementing harsher means testing so less people qualified for the direct stimulus checks. How many Republicans voted in favor of that stimulus bill? How many? Zero. So Joe Manchin has no credibility on this issue. He wants to be a tough guy, he wants to stand in the way. Well, I would argue that Democrats need to get active and they need to campaign in his state, they need to campaign in Arizona, and they need to hold him and other lawmakers who stand in the way of this important legislation accountable. They need to call out their own. Republicans do it. That's how they get every single member of the GOP to fall in line. Why don't Democrats do it? Might be because they have the same donors. Might be because they don't want to fight on behalf of the very bills they claim to support. The very bills that their own president, that they fought so hard to put in the White House, has presented and proposed to the American people.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.